I never thought I would be in this position sitting here, my hands shaking, my mind racing as I try to process the wreckage of my marriage. My name is Eric, and for the last 8 years, I believed I had a solid relationship with my wife, Lisa. We've been married for 5, and we have a 3-year-old daughter, Ava, who is the absolute light of my life. Lisa was everything I thought I wanted: smart, beautiful, confident, and full of energy. She had this way of making people feel like they were the center of the universe when she talked to them, and I always felt lucky to be the one she chose. Maybe that's why I ignored the warning signs for as long as I did. Maybe I wanted to believe that we were as strong as I had convinced myself we were, that my worries were just a byproduct of stress or paranoia. But looking back, the signs were all there. I just refused to see them. It started subtly, little shifts in behavior that could have been innocent if they weren't so frequent. Lisa started staying out later than usual, claiming she was meeting her friends more often. She would always have some excuse: dinners, drinks, a movie night, a last-minute work event. But I noticed how vague her stories became. The details were inconsistent, the timelines never quite added up. She started dressing differently, putting more effort into her appearance even on nights when she was supposedly just seeing the girls. She bought new clothes that hugged her body in ways she used to say she hated, started wearing more perfume, even changed her hair color slightly, though she brushed it off as just wanting a fresh look. Her phone became her constant companion, never left unattended, always face down on the counter or quickly swiped away when I entered a room. When I casually mentioned how attached she had become to it, she scoffed and said I was being ridiculous, that I was acting paranoid. At first, I tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut, convincing myself I was imagining things. People change, right? Lisa had given birth to our daughter, and I figured she was just trying to reclaim parts of herself that had gotten lost in the exhaustion of motherhood. Maybe she was just figuring out who she was again. That's what I told myself. But then other things started happening. She suddenly became obsessed with the gym despite never having any interest before. At first, I encouraged it, happy she had found something she enjoyed, but I noticed she never wanted me to go with her. She always had an excuse. I would slow her down. She needed her alone time. It was her way to clear her head. That would have been fine, except that she would come home after those workouts flushed, almost glowing, with this strange energy that didn't make sense. The way she acted around me changed, too. Sometimes she was overly affectionate, like she was overcompensating, and other times she was distant, distracted, lost in thought even when we were sitting together on the couch. When I asked if something was wrong, she would roll her eyes and say I was reading into things too much, that I was acting insecure. That word, insecure, became her favorite way to shut down any conversation that made her uncomfortable. The moment I questioned something, I was suddenly the problem. It got to the point where I started questioning myself. Was I really imagining all of this? Was I just being one of those jealous, overprotective husbands who couldn't handle his wife having a life outside of him? Then, the babysitter changed everything. We had hired Carly, a 19-year-old college student, to watch Ava a few nights a week whenever Lisa had her self-care nights, and I had to work late. Carly was great, responsible, sweet, and Ava absolutely adored her. One night, I came home earlier than usual, with no warning. It was just a random Tuesday, and I had a strange feeling I couldn't shake. When I walked in, Carly looked startled, like she wasn't expecting to see me. "Oh, I thought Lisa would be home before you," she said, shifting uncomfortably near the door. That didn't sit right with me. Lisa had told me she was out with coworkers and wouldn't be back for hours. I frowned. She said she had plans. Did she tell you something different? Carly hesitated, biting her lip, looking like she regretted speaking at all. I don't know if I should say anything," she mumbled, her voice uncertain. "It's just, there's a guy who comes over a lot. I thought you knew." Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. My throat went dry as I tried to keep my expression neutral. "What guy?" Carly's face turned red, and she shifted her weight from foot to foot like she wanted to be anywhere else but here. "I don't know his name," she admitted. "He's tall, kind of muscular, dark hair. He always comes about half an hour after you leave and leaves right before Lisa gets back." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My mind was spinning. "How many times?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Carly swallowed hard. "Almost every time I babysit." That was it. That was all I needed to hear. Every suspicion I had tried to suppress, every moment I had second-guessed myself, every excuse Lisa had given me, it all came crashing down on me in an instant. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't insecurity. This was real. There was a man coming into my house, slipping in when I left and disappearing before Lisa returned. And the worst part? Lisa wasn't coming home late like she claimed. That meant she had been lying about where she was, even while someone else was sneaking into her home right under my nose. I forced myself to stay calm, to act like I wasn't unraveling inside. I thanked Carly for telling me, paid her extra, and assured her she had done the right thing. She looked like she felt guilty, but I was grateful. Finally, I had something real, something I couldn't ignore, something I couldn't explain away. Now, I just had to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. That night, I barely slept. My mind replayed Carly's words over and over, each repetition hammering the truth deeper into my skull. There was another man. He was coming into my house. Lisa had been lying, and not just little white lies, big, calculated, deliberate lies meant to keep me in the dark while she carried on behind my back. Every excuse, every dismissive remark, every time she called me insecure, it was all part of her cover. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I knew I had to be smart. I needed proof, something undeniable that she couldn't twist back on me. I had spent too much time being made to feel like I was crazy. I wasn't going to give her a chance to gaslight me out of the truth this time. The next morning, I acted normal. I forced myself to go through the motions, smiling when necessary, pretending like everything was fine while my stomach churned with anxiety. Lisa, of course, was the same as ever, cheerful, affectionate, acting like the devoted wife she had convinced me she was. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. She kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work, told me she loved me, and walked out the door as if nothing had changed. The sheer audacity of it made my skin crawl. How long had she been doing this? How many times had she told me she loved me with that same smile while another man's hands had been all over her just hours before? I spent the day making a plan. I needed to know who this guy was, what exactly was going on, and how far it had gone. Carly had said he came over almost every time she babysat, which meant I had a pattern to work with. Lisa had already mentioned she'd be out again that evening, another girls' night, she claimed, though I already knew what that really meant. That was fine. I wanted her to think I was oblivious for just a little longer. I told her I'd be home late, a work emergency, the perfect excuse to not be in her way. She barely reacted, just nodded and said she hoped it wouldn't be too stressful. If she felt any guilt, she sure as hell didn't show it. When the evening rolled around, I left as usual but parked a few blocks away, out of sight from the house. My heart was pounding in my chest as I waited, watching the minutes tick by, every second stretching unbearably. I knew I could be wrong, that maybe tonight was an exception, but deep down, I didn't believe that. She was too confident in her lies, too practiced. And then, just like clockwork, he arrived. A dark-haired man, about my height but more muscular, wearing a fitted t-shirt that showed off his physique. He walked up to my front door without hesitation, punched something into his phone, and a second later, the door unlocked. My door. The house I paid for. The home where my daughter slept upstairs. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. He had a code. That meant Lisa had given it to him. That meant he wasn't just some random fling. He was someone she trusted enough to let into our lives, into our space. My stomach twisted with rage and nausea as I watched him disappear inside like he belonged there. I wanted to storm in right then, to kick the door down and demand answers, to drag him out by the collar and make him regret ever stepping foot in my house. But I knew that wouldn't get me what I needed. I needed to see it with my own eyes, to hear it, to have something undeniable. I waited for what felt like forever before finally moving. My hands were shaking as I walked up to the house, unlocking the door as quietly as possible. The moment I stepped inside, I heard them. Voices. Laughter. The sound of my wife's giggle, the one I used to think was meant just for me. My chest felt like it was caving in, but I forced myself to move forward, stepping carefully toward the hallway. I didn't have to go far. From my vantage point, I could see them in the living room. Lisa was curled up on the couch, leaning into him, her hand resting casually on his thigh like it belonged there. He was smiling at her, saying something I couldn't quite hear, but it didn't matter. The way they were sitting, the ease between them, it was obvious this wasn't new. This wasn't the first time. This wasn't a mistake or a one-time lapse in judgment. This was routine. I must have made a noise because Lisa suddenly tensed, turning her head just enough to see me standing there. For a second, her face was blank, like her brain couldn't quite process what she was seeing. Then, just as quickly, she recovered, sitting up straight and pulling her hand away like that made any difference now. "Eric," she said, her voice forced and too bright, like she was trying to pretend this was nothing. "What are you doing home so early?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was too busy staring at the man sitting beside her, watching as he slowly turned his head toward me, his expression shifting from relaxed amusement to something closer to dread. I had seen that face before. Not in person, but in photos. This wasn't just some random guy. This was Mark, her coworker. The one she had mentioned in passing a few times, the one she had insisted was just a friend. The one she had laughed about, saying he was married with kids and completely harmless. My entire body went numb. Lisa must have sensed the shift in the air because she stood up quickly, moving toward me with her hands up like she was calming down an animal. "Eric, don't freak out," she started, her voice dripping with fake patience. "This isn't what it looks like." I laughed. I actually laughed because it was just so fucking ridiculous. "Not what it looks like?" I repeated, gesturing toward the couch where Mark still sat, frozen in place like he was hoping he could disappear. "So what, Lisa? You just accidentally ended up curled against him with your hands all over him." She rolled her eyes, her expression shifting from fake innocence to annoyance. "You're being dramatic." That set me off. I took a step forward, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Dramatic? Are you serious? You've been sneaking around behind my back for God knows how long, and you're calling me dramatic?" Lisa sighed like she was already exhausted by the conversation, like I was the one making her life difficult. "Eric, you're blowing this way out of proportion. Mark and I are just friends. We were just talking." Mark finally found his voice, though it was weak. "Look, man, maybe we should all just you." I turned on him so fast he flinched. "Shut the hell up," I snapped, my rage finally boiling over. "You don't get to talk." Lisa's eyes flashed with anger at that, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I had spent months doubting myself, making excuses for her, trying to believe she was the person I thought she was. But now I had all the proof I needed. And the worst part? She wasn't even sorry. She was annoyed, irritated that she had been caught, but there wasn't a trace of guilt in her expression. I knew then that whatever came next, there was no going back. There was a moment of silence where nobody moved. It stretched unbearably, the weight of it pressing down on my chest like a cinder block. Lisa stood in front of me, arms crossed, her expression twisted into something between irritation and forced calm, like I was an unruly child throwing a tantrum in public. Mark, the coward, stayed planted on the couch, his hands gripping his knees so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He wouldn't even look at me. He just stared at the floor, like if he avoided my eyes long enough, he could pretend he wasn't sitting in my living room, in my house, next to my wife, after sneaking in through the front door with a code he never should have had. I wanted to punch him. The anger that surged through me was so sharp and immediate that it took everything in me not to lunge at him and drag him out of my home by his collar. But I wasn't going to let rage take over. I wasn't going to be the one who lost control. Lisa had spent too long trying to make me feel like I was the irrational one, the overreacting, insecure husband who saw problems where there were none. Not this time. I took a deep breath, my jaw so tight I thought my teeth might crack. "How long?" My voice was calm, too calm, which seemed to unnerve Lisa because she shifted on her feet and glanced toward Mark like she expected him to answer for her. He didn't. He still hadn't said a word. Good. At least he had enough self-awareness to realize he had no right to speak. I turned my gaze back to Lisa, waiting. She sighed, rolling her eyes like I had just asked her something stupid. "Eric, don't do this." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Do what?" "Expect my wife to tell me the truth for once." I took a step closer, and she instinctively backed up a fraction, but she caught herself quickly and squared her shoulders, lifting her chin defiantly. "I'm not stupid, Lisa. Carly told me everything. That he's been coming here almost every time I leave. That you've been lying for months. So tell me, how long has it been going on?" Something flickered across her face, shock, panic, but it disappeared just as fast, replaced by that same infuriating exasperation, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Carly," she scoffed, shaking her head. "Jesus Christ, you're seriously listening to some teenager? She's a babysitter, Eric, not a detective." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms so hard it hurt. "She's also not a liar," I shot back. "Unlike you." Lisa groaned, dragging a hand down her face, and for the first time, I saw it, real frustration. Not guilt, not regret. Just frustration that I had caught her, that she had been backed into a corner she couldn't wriggle her way out of. "Fine," she huffed. "You really want to know? A few months, okay? Happy now?" Something inside me cracked, but I refused to let her see it. "Months," I repeated, letting the word sink in, the weight of it pressing down on my chest like a ton of bricks. Months of you sneaking around. Months of you looking me in the eye and lying. Months of you. I stopped myself before I could finish that thought, before I could say something that would make this even worse, if that was even possible. Lisa sighed, rubbing her temples like she was the one suffering here. Eric, don't act like this is some huge betrayal. It's not like that. I blinked at her, genuinely stunned at the audacity. Not like that. I echoed, my voice sharp with disbelief. You've been lying to my face, sneaking around with some guy in our house, and you have the nerve to tell me it's not a betrayal? What the hell is it then? Lisa exhaled heavily, like she was exhausted by my questions, like I was just making things harder than they needed to be. It just happened, she muttered, crossing her arms tighter over her chest. I didn't plan for this, okay? But things between us haven't been great for a while. You've been distant, wrapped up in work, and I needed someone to talk to. Mark was there. He listened. I stared at her, barely able to process what I was hearing. Are you seriously blaming me for this? I asked, my voice eerily calm. Because I work? Because I provide for our family? That's your excuse. Lisa threw her hands up. It's not an excuse, Eric. It's just the truth. I felt alone, and Mark, he was just there. I turned to Mark then, finally acknowledging his presence. He flinched under my gaze, his shoulders tensing, but he still didn't say a word. So what is this, Mark? I asked, my voice cold. You're the hero, swooping in to comfort my neglected wife? That it? Mark finally looked up, his mouth opening like he wanted to respond, but no words came out. Good. There was nothing he could say that would fix this, nothing that would make it hurt any less. Lisa groaned again, rubbing her temples like she was so done with all of this. Eric, can we just not do this right now? I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I inconveniencing you? Is my reaction to finding out my wife has been screwing around with her coworker ruining your night? Lisa let out a sharp breath, shaking her head. I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me the truth for once, I snapped. Were you ever going to tell me? Or were you just planning to keep sneaking around behind my back until I found out some other way? Lisa hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. That moment of silence was all the answer I needed. I nodded slowly, the realization settling in, solidifying something deep in my gut. Right, I muttered, mostly to myself. That's what I thought. I looked between the two of them, Lisa still standing stiffly in front of me, Mark still frozen like a deer in headlights. You know what? You two deserve each other. I turned on my heel, walking toward the door, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Lisa called after me, but I didn't stop. I needed space. I needed air. I needed to get out of that house before the weight of it all crushed me completely. As I stepped outside, the night air hit me like a slap, cool and sharp against my burning skin. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in, trying to clear the fog of rage and betrayal that clouded my mind. I knew there was no coming back from this. The marriage I thought I had, the life I had built, the trust one had given so freely, it was all gone. Now, I just had to figure out what came next. I drove around for hours that night, not knowing where I was going, just needing to get away from the suffocating reality of my own home. My mind replayed the scene over and over, every word, every lie, every dismissive look Lisa had thrown my way as if I was the one causing problems, as if she wasn't the one who had torched our marriage like it meant nothing. I thought about Mark sitting there, too much of a coward to even speak, the way his eyes had darted to the floor like he hoped I would just disappear and spare him the awkwardness of facing the man whose life he had helped destroy. I thought about all the nights Lisa had left, all the times she had kissed me goodbye and walked right into his arms, probably laughing about how easy it was to keep me in the dark. The weight of it all was unbearable. At some point, I ended up in the parking lot of an all-night diner, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. I knew I couldn't just keep driving forever. I had to go back eventually. Not for Lisa. I didn't give a damn what she was doing at that point. But for Ava, my daughter was asleep in that house, completely unaware that her mother had just ripped our family apart. That was the hardest part, the one thing I couldn't wrap my head around. How could Lisa do this knowing what it would do to Ava? How could she be so careless, so selfish, to risk breaking up our home for what? Some fling. Some pathetic excuse to feel wanted when she already had a husband who would have done anything for her. By the time I finally went back, it was nearly 3 a.m. The house was dark except for the faint glow from the living room, which meant Lisa was probably still up, waiting. Sure enough, when I stepped inside, she was sitting on the couch, arms crossed, her face set in that same look of irritation she had worn earlier, like I was the one who had made her night miserable. I barely looked at her as I shut the door behind me, walking past her toward the stairs. But of course, she couldn't just let me go to bed without having the last word. Are we really doing this? She huffed, her voice laced with exhaustion. I stopped but didn't turn around. Doing what, Lisa? My voice was flat, empty. I didn't even have the energy to be angry anymore. She let out a frustrated sigh. Acting like this is the end of the world. People have problems in their marriage, Eric. It happens. I turned then, slowly, because I needed to see if she was actually serious. The expression on her face told me she was. She genuinely thought she could spin this into something normal, something that just happened like a minor mistake instead of the complete and utter betrayal it was. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Problems in a marriage, Lisa, are things you work through together. What you did, that's not a problem, that's a choice. Repeated, over and over. You lied to me for months. You let that guy into our home. You let him near our daughter. And now you want to sit here and tell me it's just some marriage problem? Lisa groaned, standing up and pacing a little before turning back to me. You act like I wanted this to happen, she snapped, her eyes flashing with frustration. Like I set out to hurt you. I didn't, Eric. She let out a heavy breath, shaking her head. Things changed between us, okay? You got distant. I felt alone, and Mark was there. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. You didn't mean for it to go this far. I repeated slowly, as if saying it aloud would somehow make it make sense. You gave him the code to our house, Lisa. You lied about where you were. You snuck around, knowing damn well what you were doing. Don't insult me by pretending this was some accident. She pressed her lips together, arms crossing again, her defenses going up. And what about you? She shot back. Do you even realize how absent you've been lately? Always working, always stressed, barely even looking at me anymore. What did you expect me to do? I felt my hands clench at my sides, my body trembling with the sheer effort it took not to explode. I expected you to talk to me, I ground out. I expected you to tell me if you were unhappy, not screw around behind my back like a goddamn teenager. Lisa rolled her eyes, shaking her head. You're so dramatic, she muttered under her breath, and that was it. That was the moment I knew I was done. Because she wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't even remotely remorseful. She was annoyed. Annoyed that she got caught. Annoyed that she had to deal with the fallout. Annoyed that I wasn't just rolling over and accepting whatever half-assed excuse she decided to throw my way. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. We're done, Lisa. The words felt heavier than I expected, but also freeing. Final. She flinched slightly, but then her jaw tightened. So that's it. You're just throwing everything away. I let out another hollow laugh. I'm throwing everything away? I gestured around us, at the house we had built together, the life we had shared, the mess she had made of it. You did that all on your own. She opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't want to hear it. I turned and started up the stairs, needing to get away from her, needing space before I said something I couldn't take back. Her voice followed me, sharp and biting. You really think leaving is going to make you the victim here? I paused at the top of the stairs, gripping the railing so hard my fingers ached. I could feel my blood boiling, my heart pounding, but I didn't turn back. I don't need to make myself the victim, I said quietly. You already did that for me. I walked into the bedroom, shutting the door behind me, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel doubt. I didn't feel confused or paranoid, or like maybe I was the one who had been overthinking things. I felt clarity. I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I could never trust her again. And if trust was gone, what was left? A marriage built on lies wasn't a marriage at all. It was just a ticking time bomb, and Lisa had already set it off. Lying in bed that night, I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the inevitable. This was over. There was no fixing this. There was no moving past it. The only question now was how I was going to pick up the pieces and start over. And the worst part? I wasn't even sure where to begin. The next morning, I woke up with a hollow feeling in my chest, like something had been carved out of me overnight. I had spent hours lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every argument, every lie Lisa had told me. And now, in the harsh light of day, it wasn't just a nightmare, it was real. The weight of it pressed down on me as I got up, moving through the motions like a man sleepwalking through his own life. I could hear Lisa downstairs, moving around the kitchen, acting like it was just another morning, like she hadn't blown up our entire marriage the night before. The audacity of it made my blood boil. I wasn't sure if it was delusion or arrogance on her part, maybe both. Either way, I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. I had always imagined that if something like this ever happened, I would rage, scream, throw things, make her feel every ounce of pain she had inflicted on me. But sitting there, lacing up my shoes, I realized I had nothing left to give her. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want answers. I didn't even want revenge. I just wanted to be done. I wanted to walk out that door and never look back. But then there was Ava, my beautiful, innocent little girl who had no idea that her world was about to be shattered. That was the hardest part of all of this. If it were just Lisa and me, I would have packed my bags and left without another word. But I couldn't just abandon my daughter. I had to think, to plan, to make sure I didn't let my emotions make things worse for her. I finally forced myself downstairs, and Lisa was already sitting at the table, sipping her coffee like it was any other day. She looked up when she saw me, her expression unreadable. "You're up early," she said, as if she hadn't completely detonated our life hours ago. I didn't answer. I grabbed my own mug from the cabinet, pouring myself coffee even though I didn't want it. I just needed something to do, something to keep my hands from shaking. I sat across from her, staring into the dark liquid, trying to find the right words. I could feel her eyes on me, waiting, probably hoping I would just get over it, that I would accept whatever half-assed justification she had come up with in her mind. Finally, I set my mug down and met her gaze. "I'm leaving," I said simply. She blinked, taken aback. "Leaving where?" I exhaled sharply, barely able to keep the frustration out of my voice. "This house. This marriage. You, Lisa. I'm done." She set her cup down a little too forcefully, her expression darkening. "Oh, come on, Eric. Don't be dramatic." There it was again. That word. Dramatic. As if my reaction to my wife cheating on me for months, bringing another man into our home, was an overreaction. I clenched my jaw, inhaling slowly to keep my temper in check. "Stop saying that," I said, my voice quieter than I expected, but firm. "Stop acting like I'm crazy for not being okay with this." Lisa let out a frustrated sigh, leaning back in her chair. "So what? You're just going to run away? Leave Ava? Destroy everything over one mistake?" I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "One mistake? Lisa, it wasn't one. It was months. Months of lying. Months of sneaking around. This wasn't some heat-of-the-moment slip-up. This was deliberate. Over and over again. And you weren't even sorry." I leaned forward, my voice steady but ice-cold. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed us. Our family. Our daughter. You let some guy come into our home, our daughter's home, like it was nothing. So don't sit there and act like I'm the one destroying this." For the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Maybe it was realization, maybe regret, or maybe just anger that I wasn't reacting the way she had expected. She pressed her lips together, tapping her fingers against the table. "So what's your plan, then?" she asked, her tone sharp, defensive. I straightened. "I'm getting a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. And I'm going for custody of Ava." That got her attention. Her entire body tensed, and her expression twisted into something between shock and fury. "You can't be serious," she snapped. "You think you can just take her from me?" I met her glare, my jaw set. "I don't think anything, Lisa. I just know I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure she's not stuck in a house where this kind of behavior is normal." She scoffed, pushing away from the table and standing up. "Oh, please. Don't act like I'm some horrible mother just because of this." I stood up too, towering over her now, my voice low and controlled. "You're not a bad mother because you cheated, Lisa. You're a bad mother because you didn't care what this would do to our daughter. Because you were reckless. Because you let another man into her home while you were lying to her father's face. You don't get to play the victim here." She was fuming now, her hands clenched at her sides, her breathing heavy. But I could see it. She wasn't angry because she was losing me. She was angry because she was losing control. She had spent so long twisting things, manipulating situations to make herself look like the reasonable one, the one who had been wronged. And now, she realized it wasn't going to work. Not this time. I grabbed my keys from the counter and turned to leave. "I'll be back for my things," I said over my shoulder. "And for Ava, you'll hear from my lawyer." Lisa didn't stop me. She didn't run after me, didn't cry, didn't beg me to stay. She just stood there, arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line, watching as I walked out the door. Maybe she thought I was bluffing. Maybe she thought I would calm down, that I would come back and try to make things work. But she was wrong. As I stepped outside, breathing in the cool morning air, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. I didn't have all the answers yet. I didn't know how ugly the divorce would get, how hard the custody battle would be, how much more pain I would have to go through before I could fully move on. But I did know one thing. I was done being lied to. I was done being manipulated. And for the first time in months, I wasn't second-guessing myself. I was finally free. The first few weeks after I left were a blur of paperwork, lawyer meetings, and gut-wrenching conversations. I found a temporary place to stay, a small apartment on the other side of town. Nothing special, but at least it was mine. At least it was a space where I could breathe without feeling the suffocating weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. The hardest part wasn't leaving Lisa. That, at least, had been easy in a way. Once I saw how little remorse she had, how quickly she shifted into playing the victim, I knew I had made the right choice. The hardest part was being away from Ava. Every time I had to drop her back off at the house, our house, the one I had worked so hard to build for our family, it felt like I was being stabbed in the heart. She didn't understand what was happening. She was too young to grasp why Daddy wasn't home anymore, why Mommy seemed tense every time I picked her up. I did my best to keep things normal for her, smiling when I felt like breaking down, making her laugh when all I wanted to do was scream. Lisa, for the most part, kept things civil at first, probably because she was still in denial that I was really going through with this. She didn't think I'd follow through with the custody battle. She thought I would cool off, that I would start missing her, that I would eventually crawl back and beg to fix things. It wasn't until the first set of legal documents were delivered to her that the reality of it hit. And then the real Lisa, the one who had been hiding behind fake smiles and gaslighting for years, finally emerged. She was furious, spewing every insult she could muster, claiming I was being cruel, that I was trying to punish her for something that wasn't even that big of a deal. She accused me of trying to ruin her life, of overreacting, of using Ava as a weapon against her. I barely even responded. I let my lawyer do the talking, refused to be baited into pointless arguments, and focused on what actually mattered: getting my daughter out of that toxic situation. I wasn't trying to take Ava away from her mother completely, but I wanted primary custody. I wanted Ava to grow up in a stable home, not in a place where her mother made reckless decisions and justified lying like it was no big deal. Lisa fought me on it, of course, twisting everything in court to make me look like the bad guy. She tried to paint me as cold, unfeeling, as a workaholic who had neglected her, conveniently leaving out the part where she had been sneaking around with another man for months. But facts were facts, and the evidence was on my side. I had texts, phone records, statements from Carly, even security footage from our own damn doorbell camera showing Mark entering the house on nights Lisa claimed she was out with friends. The more she tried to spin her story, the worse she looked, and eventually, she had no choice but to accept that she wasn't going to win. The day I was awarded primary custody of Ava was the first time in months that I felt like I could finally breathe. It wasn't full custody. Lisa still got visitation, still had her weekends, but it was enough. Enough to know that Ava's day-to-day life would be with me, that I could protect her from whatever selfish choices Lisa made next. She was furious, of course, spewing more of the same garbage about how I was ruining her life, how I was taking things too far, how she wasn't a bad mom just because she made one mistake. But I didn't care anymore. Her words had no power over me. She could lie to herself all she wanted, but I knew the truth. The first night Ava stayed with me in my new place, I sat on the couch after she had fallen asleep, staring at the blank TV screen, trying to process everything that had led to this moment. I had lost so much. My marriage, my home, the life I thought I had built. And yet, in that quiet moment, I realized I had gained something too. Clarity. Freedom. The ability to finally live without constantly second-guessing myself, without wondering if I was being lied to, manipulated, played for a fool. I had spent so much time trying to be the husband Lisa wanted me to be, trying to be understanding, patient, believing that we were solid even when the foundation had been crumbling beneath my feet. But now, I didn't have to pretend anymore. I didn't have to stay in a marriage where I was being disrespected, where my love and trust were taken for granted. I wish I could say that moving on was easy, that I woke up the next day feeling lighter, completely free of the pain Lisa had caused me. But the truth is, healing isn't instant. There were still nights when I lay awake, wondering what I could have done differently, if I had missed the signs sooner, if I had been blind to things long before the babysitter ever spoke up. There were still moments when the anger hit me like a tidal wave, when I wanted to scream at Lisa for how easily she had thrown everything away. But those moments became less frequent, the weight of it all slowly fading as time went on. I focused on Ava, on building a new life for the two of us, on rediscovering who I was outside of being Lisa's husband, outside of being the man who had spent so long trying to make a failing marriage work. And somewhere along the way, I realized that I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. I was waking up without the constant dread of wondering if I was being lied to. I was coming home to a place that was truly mine, where I didn't have to walk on eggshells or second-guess every conversation. And most importantly, I was raising Ava in a home filled with honesty and love, where she would never have to question if she was growing up in a house built on lies. One day, maybe I'll be ready to open my heart again. Maybe I'll meet someone who shows me that love doesn't have to come with betrayal, with secrets, with manipulation. But for now, I'm content. Content knowing that I made the right choice. That I walked away from something toxic instead of letting it destroy me. That I chose myself and my daughter over the lies. And for the first time in a long time, that's enough.